Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Protestant Education Channel. Today we're going to be talking about Philipp Spener and the Pietists. So, why don't we start with Philipp Spener? Philipp Spener was a Lutheran theologian who's often credited as the father of Pietism. And he comes up around a time when Christian theologians were pushing towards the idea of living your faith, more so than this idea had really been emphasized before. It's because a lot of them saw the churches that they were going to falling away. But more on that later. At the University of Strasbourg, Philipp Spener would become trained in Lutheran theology and philosophy. And after he would get his master's degree, he would start tutoring the children of noble families. In 1663, he was appointed a pastor, but his duties as a pastor would be waived until 3 years after his appointment, where he would become the chief pastor of the Lutheran Church in Frankfurt. While being the chief pastor of the Lutheran Church in Frankfurt, he would publish the Pietists, which is the keystone work in Pietist theology. Spener taught that an emphasis on personal transformation and personal devotion and renewal, and he thought that strengthening these already devoted Christians that were going to the church would renew the church. And so in the Pia Desidera, he basically has 6 points on how to grow these strong believers. And those 6 points are as follows. Number 1, believers should be well acquainted with the Bible through Bible study and personal reading. Number 2, we should increase the involvement of laity in the church within all functions. Number 3, emphasize that all believers need to put into practice their faith. Number 4, to approach religious discussions with humility and love and avoid controversy whenever possible. This gets quoted a lot from him, where he says the infamous, in essentials unity, and non-essentials liberty, and all things charity. That's kind of where that point, or that idea comes from. And he's a big believer in that point, or he was a big believer in that point. So point number 5 is to ensure that pastors are both well-read and pious. And number 6, to focus preaching on developing faith in ordinary believers. Now, most historians agree that while Spener is called the father of pietism, he wasn't really a pietist. And he didn't really differ with Lutheran orthodoxy all that much. The points that he did disagree with the Lutheran orthodoxy on were pretty, not popular, but they weren't really fringe either takes. The 2 things that he really had a problem, or that he differed with them on, was the expectation of Jews converting to Christianity and the papacy falling before the triumph of the church in Revelation, and the idea that regeneration is a required condition for a theologian. Now, he didn't really advocate for the legalistic and separatist practices that we think about when we think about pietism. And a lot of those practices came later as more of an interpretation on what he said, and people taking some of his points to what would be, in their idea, their logical conclusion. But, what is Pietism, and who were the Pietists? Well, Pietism was a movement that spread around Europe, but it really started in Germany. And the emphasis on personal holiness and, piety would spread throughout Europe, causing many to become Pietists. And as it spread around the churches all over Europe, the churches would be renewed. Oftentimes they would find themselves renewed with vigor and believers and zeal. You know, all the fun words. But Pietists were really everywhere around that time in the 1600s. They were in Germany, they were in, let me go back to my notes here. Yeah, they were in Germany, they moved to Scandinavia. There's even a group of Pietists out in Indonesia. However, I think that came a lot later and isn't really important to our discussion today. Pietism didn't necessarily go away either. There are still churches that adhere to Pietist doctrines. So, let's talk about what Pietism means for us today and what we kind of how we kind of apply this. So I think the first thing I should point out is, as a Methodist, obviously Pietism means a lot to me. Pietism was a great influence on the Wesleys and their theology around personal holiness. And I think that personal pietism is good. A lot of these Pietists, or a lot of these Methodists who would be inspired by the Pietists, you can really see a lot of that influence within the holiness movement, which happened a little bit later after the creation of Pietism. And Pietists also became a pretty big faction among the groups in the United States in the early colonies. So while Pietism might not be practiced as much today, I think there's still a lot that we can learn from them. I think their emphasis on personal holiness is an important reminder to us that we can be theologically well-read, but without piety and without putting our theology into practice in our day-to-day lives, it's almost worthless. Another thing I really like about Pietism is the emphasis on the laity. The laity is the blood of the church, and the body of believers is important. And strengthening that body is also very important to keeping these churches together. So we need to study the Word together. We need to be talking about the Word together as lay people. Strong believers strengthen both weaker and stronger believers. Iron sharpens iron. This is biblical. And without the laity, all we really have is a room with a pulpit. A small group that prays together is very powerful to our spiritual enemies. And I don't think we really think about that nearly as much as we should. So that pretty much wraps up the video about Philipp Spener and the Pietists. I don't really have much else to say here, but other than I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I hope you guys continue to have a wonderful day, and well, God bless you, God bless your families, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.